Well, hello everybody. This is another episode of Politically Incorrect History. Yes, I'm still doing this shit. And yes, there will be swearing in this episode. I'm joined here by a familiar face we haven't seen in a while. Justin, how are you?
Yes, I'm still doing this shit. You mean I'm still doing this shit?
Yeah.
Help. I'm still locked in the basement. I have not been given any food or water. I'm wasting away. Please send somebody. Thank you.
And
What's up, dude?
For those of you in the audience who are wondering, because you may have come here looking for echoes of war, this is still the same podcast. It's just I like to, now and then do a less serious podcast with my friends. I invite them over. If you're watching this visually, you can see we're having quite a few beers, and there's gonna be swearing. I'm not gonna be saying die-hard facts. I'm gonna be talking out of my ass. Treat this like a guy at the bar talking about some bullshit history story, and you don't quite believe 100% of what he's saying. That's what you're going to get today.
When I was in Vietnam, I killed 200,000 men with a fork.
Exactly.
Yeah, pretty much.
And there's no scripts for these episodes, clearly, and Justin is not a historian, but I try to figure out weird ways to just shoehorn him in. Yeah, I've had a few to drink. And I was thinking it would kind of be a funny episode to talk about why, I'll title it this way, why the Axis sucked at World War II. Hey guys, this is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. Please don't forget to check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account over at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where you can join the ranks and gain access to a hell of a lot of goodies. At the base minimum, you get access to the exclusive monthly podcast, early access to all of my content, voting rights for what subjects I will tackle next, and at higher tiers, I have much more goodies to come. So please click that link and check it out. And I guess the only way to really start this, and I did make a few talking points in case Justin needs some help on this, but Justin, you know probably the general World War II history. You at least know who the actors are and stuff. Would you happen to have any questions off the bat? Anything at all about, why did the Axis screw up during World War II, or maybe things that they, what did they have going against them? Any questions like that?
Well, you see, it's weird because when you talk about screw up or why they sucked, I mean, you can always say the people who lost sucked.
Yes,
but when you talk about a conflict that takes so many years and claims so many casualties, it by any means wasn't I don't think it was a free win for the Allied forces. But I think we've talked enough in other podcasts in the sense that it was just more doomed to fail eventually.
I think, in all honesty, if you want to be a by-the-numbers kind of guy and you want to look at the economics, because war is economics at its basis.
Which we've discussed for many, many years between you and I.
There was just no hope in hell. If you look at, let's say these are two sports teams, the players that they're using, one side's got a bunch of basic all-stars who are talented in their own way. So you got the British code breakers, pretty good military experience coming into it. You got the Americans, just unbelievable production. They can outproduce any other nation. They're just so wealthy. And then the Russians, well, you just have a lot of people you can throw into a meat grinder. So, it's always good to have the meat grinder guys.
Oh, fuck.
And then they're against three dudes who have no production capabilities, no oil, that's a big one. And for their own specific reasons, they're just incompetent. Yeah.
Well, Germany at least had some production with steel and things like that, but it wasn't anywhere near to match what the U.S. had. But getting back to the point of why did they suck or why did they lose, I mean, I'm pretty sure we've talked in previous episodes when Yamamoto was planning the attack on Pearl Harbor and all these things during the Pacific War, he said straight up, we can't beat the U.S.
Yeah.
But if we have this precisely timed strike, we can delay them long enough to achieve what was ultimately their goal, which was not the same as Hitler's. They just wanted control over Asia.
Yeah, actually, I can...
And their whole point was to delay the U.S. long enough so that they can control Asia and then go, okay, we're sorry, but we own China now, and hoping the U.S. would just let that go. Obviously, it didn't work in their favor.
No, but
so how exactly did Japan fuck that up? What was the catalyst? I mean, obviously, attacking U.S. was dumb. But how could they possibly think that they could just take all these territories and then just be like, oh, we're sorry, and then everything would be okay?
Well, Grandpa Craig here from the Pacific War Channel, so I guess this is my field, we'll dabble into this question. And right off the bat, as you mentioned, Yamamoto did have the foresight about exactly how it would go down. And he was pretty accurate. He said, I could probably run wild for about 6 months after Pearl Harbor.
Yep.
And he did.
More or less exactly.
It was almost exact on the dot. It was about 6 months that they had while the Americans had to pick up their shit together. The leader, well, it's to say he was the leader, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, because Japan was basically run by two organizations. There was the Army and the Navy that were fighting each other for resources, because the government funds you, and whoever argues they need it gets the funding. The Navy got the funding because the direction of the war was pretty much naval. They had to go to these locations. There were islands, and they had to hit the Americans out in the ocean.
Japan is an island. You either have to take a plane or a ship to get off of it. So
yeah, but the Army guys, they definitely had their own, rationales. I mean, the most pressing thing was the China War. The whole reason why they went to war with the West, and that was, Britain, the Dutch, the Dutch and the Americans, was because they were trying to solve their issues with China. They needed oil, they needed iron, they needed tin, rubber, all these things for war materials.
Which are all things that they don't produce.
They don't have any oil, except for there's a bit of synthetic oil in Manchuria. The program was barely meeting, they couldn't even meet 10% of their demand. It was a joke. The most lucrative oil was in the Dutch East Indies. But to go there would mean war with all three of said parties.
Yep.
But the crux of it was the China War. So they were stuck in China. They could not get out of it. They didn't want to lose face. They needed to defeat China. So they basically, like any good dictator, would do. It's like, oh, we have a problem. Let's just start another war. And that keeps it going, right? But while Yamamoto understood American production because he had, toured the United States, he had thorough knowledge of the United States. His colleague, who was in charge of the army for a long time, Hideki Tojo, who would become the prime minister. And I guess you could say he was the dictator of Japan, but honestly, he wasn't absolute. He didn't have absolute power. He did not have much knowledge of the United States. He had gone to the United States, I believe it was once, spent his whole time on a train, didn't even walk outside the freaking carts. He didn't really, he never felt the assembly lines. Yamamoto actually saw like a Ford factory. So he understood. Well,
didn't he study in the U.S.? Like at Harvard or
something?
Most
of these guys studied in the U.S., but this guy, Tojo no. And Tojo... Yamamoto did, yes. He went to Harvard. Yeah, he went to a few schools. I mean, studied. It was brief.
Yeah, but still, it's,
Yeah, of course. Tojo, he had no respect for the Americans. He believed in the same ignorance that a lot of people in Japan who had never been to the United States or knew anything. Like, they believed, like, the Americans were kind of these fat cats who all they cared about was making money. They didn't have the actual stomach to do any hard labor or hard work, like going to war.
Right.
So Yamamoto basically was trying to meet both evils in the situation. He's like, look, we can deliver a surprise attack like we did in the Russo-Japanese War, because Yamamoto's like prodigy, he did the same thing at Port Arthur. And he's like, okay, we can maybe knock out the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Take them about a year to rebuild, to be able to hit us. In that time, we can consolidate. Then we just fortify every place that we got, and we fight every single inch. And then we hope to retain 50%. So they actually knew this is going to be a bloody shit fuck of a war. There's a lot of swear words there, sorry audience. And they expected to just try and bleed the Americans as much as they could. And hopefully the Americans would be like, okay, let's just go to the peace table.
Yeah, and I guess the more of China they take, the more they can hope to retain after the negotiations. After.
And until the very end of the war, they hoped to God that they could retain at least Manchuria. And they had basically put all of their hopes vested in... a separate peace treaty through the Russians instead of the Americans. And then when the Soviets said no and they invaded Manchuria, that's when the Japanese like, okay, well, we surrender. It's all done. And I mean, this is during the nukes going off too.
Yeah. And I seem to remember, I don't remember if we touched on this in another video, but a big part of why they hit the U.S. also was that I guess they figured Germany wouldn't bother them going into China. Like they wouldn't have any resistance or feedback from that.
It's very awkward, the alliance system back then, because the Japanese had they had signed something that was known as the tripartite, the Pact of Steel, basically. Yeah. But it in no way binded either of them to actually like declaring war or like really doing anything to help the other. Like it's really weird.
But I figured it was more of like, hey, guess what? We're on the same side. I'm going to poke at the U.S. because you don't like them. Just don't bother me while I'm taking over half of China over here.
Well, actually, so here to go down the rabbit hole. Germany unleashed Operation Barbarossa, which was the invasion of the USSR.
Yeah.
This was a tremendous surprise to the Japanese because the
Probably a
Japanese
huge mistake too, but
the Japanese wanted to forever, because their main rival is the USSR. They wanted to go to war with the Soviets. Germany all of a sudden surprises them and signs like basically an arm, it's like a pact with the Russians out of nowhere. They don't even tell the Japanese allies like, oh yeah, no, we're good with the Soviets. Japanese are like, what the hell's going on? They don't understand. They're like, this is like almost a betrayal. The Japanese suck it up. They sign a neutrality pact with the Soviets as a result because they basically don't have a choice. And then the Germans just all of a sudden invade the Soviet Union. So the Japanese are like scrambling, because it takes plans to do an offensive. And for basically like a month period, a lot of army commanders are trying to figure out like this crazy plan to help the Germans storm Moscow somehow.
right.
Or at least basically be an annoyance in Siberia, because the Japanese couldn't even get like a 1,000 kilometer. It's
no
ridiculous.
way.
There's no way. But it could have happened, but the Japanese were taken by surprise. They had no preparations. They had no mobile force on land to do it. It was ludicrous. That's why they ended up attacking the Americans, because they had run out of their oil supplies. The Americans were embargoing them, so scrap iron, rubber, tin, oil, all these things. They forced Japan into a corner. It was intentional. FDR was looking for a way to like actually start a war because he wanted to join World War II.
Right.
But and Japan. When you look at it, they came into World War II. It's like, yeah, they had a lot of success for those 6 months, but there was just no way in hell they were going to win. The production capabilities of the two nations, it's ridiculous. Population size too.
Well, I think there's a lot of research that says Pearl Harbor could have been a lot more effective too.
Yeah, but it doesn't really like. The most the Japanese could have done is if they somehow could have actually because the rationale is we want to destroy the ships, but we really want the United States to give up Hawaii. You can't. They could not invade Hawaii because I'm like literally the tide. You can't land ships properly to do an amphibious assault because of high tide when they wanted to hit, because they hit in December and shit. The manpower on the island, if Japan even tried to invade, they would have been slaughtered. The army base, the personnel, the anti-aircraft weaponry, it would have knocked them out.
Well, even the U.S. not being properly prepared for Pearl Harbor, they still defended it not bad.
Oh, they were.
Half their AA guns were locked away in bunkers.
Yeah.
And they had requested more support from the government, who basically told them, fuck you, you're not getting it.
Yeah. But just like you probably heard the Battle of Midway, part of the Midway plan was to actually invade Midway. If the HQ detachment, who was set to invade, if they had landed, they would have been massacred. The reality was that the Japanese had no capability when it came to amphibious assault. And what they were facing, like, by the numbers, and it would have been insane. Like, they could not have hoped to take it. But, could Pearl Harbor have gone a little bit better?
No, but they were looking if they could have cracked the oil depot, if they could have...
Yeah, they couldn't have.
But also, I didn't know this until recently, because obviously, me being the big history guy that I am, I come across a random 10 weird facts about Pearl Harbor video, and then, of course, I go down a rabbit hole. But... I didn't realize there was a second attempt at Pearl Harbor, which didn't go so well for Japan.
Mm-hmm.
But that was like almost their bid to, let's see if we can do it again, or let's see if we can get another 6 months out of it.
They prodded
type of thing.
They prodded the East Coast, the West Coast, the United States cities. They prodded the West Coast, the United States about the same time. Basically, they had submarines trying to do like these little attacks and stuff.
Yeah, but apparently they launched like some planes, but there was weather that stopped some of them, and then the rest got shot down. And
yeah. So the submarines that the Japanese had were the largest during World War II. And they could be equipped with midget subs, and they could also be equipped with float planes, which have minimal capabilities of bombing. So for instance, they tried to attack Pearl Harbor again. But another thing they did, which could have been cool, was they wanted to light a huge forest fire in California and Oregon. So they had sent float planes from submarines to try and do incendiary attacks, but basically, it came down to the choice in the season. It just didn't work out for them. They did make attacks.
They should try now. There's a forest fire there.
Oh, yeah. With the current governor of California, it'd be easy to take it out because that idiot couldn't fucking run that state at all. But, the Japanese, in essence, like, even people like to talk about the potential third strike. So, when they were doing their aircraft strikes at Pearl Harbor, there was 2 waves. There was a planned 3rd wave. It really didn't matter because these are aircraft coming off of aircraft carriers. So these are not what you would call like heavy bombers or even medium heavy. These are smaller airplanes. The armaments that they had couldn't crack the supply depots that go over these oil fields.
Right.
And the fire teams, actually, the way that it was made, if somehow they actually blew up one, the fire teams would be able to contain it. It wouldn't have spread to the other ones. Yeah. Like these are actually very well made, and a lot of people for a long time still believe this nonsense that's like, oh yeah, if they knocked out those oil things, then the United States would have to leave Hawaii. Yeah, it's true, but they couldn't. There's no way they could have managed that. They would have loved to do that. That would have been impressive.
Well, yeah. And as it is, it seems they, obviously did a lot of damage to whatever 8 ships were there or something, but.
I even read 6 months damage, maybe. Yeah.
Well, it's still a lot.
Yeah, it knocked them out for a while.
I even read somewhere that they pumped a whole bunch of munitions into a decommissioned ship. Was it the Utah? I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they one of the bombers attacked it, and then 5 more followed suit.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's only some mechanics or somebody else on this thing.
Actually, there is one crazy story that a fellow YouTuber loved because I did a podcast. His name is Nitin from Flashpoint History.
Okay.
So basically you'd imagine you're being attacked, right? And you're on these ships at Pearl Harbor. Some of the ships tried to get away. So one ship, and it was a capital ship, they actually got out of port and they were trying to make their way. So the way that Pearl Harbor works is there's like a narrow gateway to kind of get out.
Yeah.
So the ship is going near that gateway. So when the Japanese saw that, they're like, "Oh shit! If we can hit him, it'll block the entire gateway.
Nobody can get out.
Can't get in, can't get out." And that would have knocked, that would have been pretty bad for a long time because you resupplying the island and all that, it would have be a huge complication.
That's actually true.
That's a good what if scenario, but it still wouldn't really change the grand scheme of things. So just think, every time they talk like the alternate history kind of stuff, it's like maybe it adds a few more months to World War II. That's the kind of scenario because you're not getting over the fact
it was a war of attrition in the end.
Yeah. Because even when the Japanese got their grubby hands on the oil fields in the Dutch East Indies, the engineers, the Dutch engineers, they sabotaged everything. They weren't willing to work with the Japanese, and the Japanese didn't have the technical know-how to get everything operational fast. It took them a long time, and then, you have oil. Great, how are you going to get it back to the home island? Put it on ships. What are the Allies going to do? They're going to fucking knock out your ships. So it didn't work out too well for them,
Yeah.
Logistically, it was pretty bad.
And I mean, look, everybody loves a comeback or an underdog story, but let's put in a shitty game reference for those of you who play Axis and Allies like we do, or even Monopoly. Yeah. You and I both know a Monopoly game is won 6 hours before it's over.
Yes.
Every time we would play Axis and Allies or even the Lord of the Rings map or something, we knew we had the game won.
Yeah, you're a cat.
But if we wanted to wipe out every enemy, it was like another freaking 4 hours.
Yeah.
Of just going step by step by step. So, I think Japan bought themselves time, but obviously they knew it was unwinnable at the end. But I just don't know how... I'm curious as to what would have happened if they'd have just instead focused all their energy on just going after China and not bothered to hit the U.S. And just say, you know what, this is our goal, and then see if the U.S. would have let them keep more of it once...
This is the issue. By the time of Pearl Harbor, there had been escalations in the embargoes. So Britain, the Dutch government exile at that point, and the Americans had gradually started what was becoming 100% embargo. For Japan, almost, I think it was about between 80-90% of just their oil, and I think 70% of the scrap irons is coming from the States. They couldn't actually run their military in China if they wanted to. Could they have occupied China and just kept it status quo? Yeah, but the problem was the leader of China, Chiang Kai-shek, he was actually taking time to train, certain divisions and get his shit together. Eventually, he was going to overwhelm the Japanese because just by sheer numbers and the fact that the Allied nations were secretly shipping him goods, to be able to, sustain the war effort. A lot of the action during the early part of the Pacific War was just trying to contain all these leaks coming into China. So places like Hong Kong, it was an open port. The British could bring goods to China, and the Americans too.
I mean, we've talked so many times about Japan trying to control the supply lines into China
Yeah.
through Manchuria and things like that, through certain waterways. You know,
They could never control the USSR though. So there was one port.
yeah, of course not.
You know, it was Vladivostok, and the Americans. So even while at war, the Americans, as long as there was a Russian, signal on the ship, the Japanese couldn't touch it. So the Americans were just sending like a bunch of materials over, to the Soviet Union. The Japanese just had to watch it go by.
All until Rocky beat Drago, and that was it.
Yep. No, when Drago went down, it was over.
Yeah. So let's move on to our favorite Germans.
Oh, you don't want to do the Italians first before we get to the big Germans?
Oh, fuck it, why not? Now, I don't know a whole lot about
The
this,
Italians are fun.
but I have played way too much of Italy in fucking Axis and Allies to know that they goddamn suck.
Yeah.
And they're nothing there. Except for one time, I'm not going to mention any names, but somebody managed to lose Great Britain to the Italians in a game we played.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
To a tactical strike. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
It was very embarrassing, but absolutely hilarious.
Fuck. Yeah, I remember that.
Which was like the hero's play of the hero's play. But, okay, how did Italy screw up?
I think it's one of the funniest things to talk about because Italy screwed up everything. It's amazing. Everyone should study like World War II Italy is fascinating and how much they screwed up because you have an ally, right? So you depend on them stuff. Can you imagine having an ally that makes things worse for you? Like Italy's actions.
Played League of Legends. I'm well aware of that.
So let's say you got a support. You're playing ADC, and the support is just ungodly feeding. We're talking like 10 minutes into the game.
A blitzcrank that can't hit a single hook.
Yeah.
But
is feeding the enemy. So the enemy ADC is just fucking your ass. This is a great allegory for Italy. That is what it is.
Thank you.
Italy is playing like Lux support. I mean, I haven't played League of Legends 10 years. I don't know the game anymore. Playing like Lux support, thinks that she's going to get like those ults and it's going to make the difference. Goes in for like retarded kills and just feeds Vayne. And you're playing like Caitlyn. And you're like, oh, I had an easy game. I outrange Vayne. I can just, farm out. No, now Vayne's fucking you. And Vayne is giving you the dick. And now Vayne is like 10-0. It's 15 minutes on the clock. And you're like, oh, I only have 5 more minutes to go until I can surrender. I desist about Italy.
Yeah.
All right, where to start? I want to start with the military campaigns that Italy engaged on its own lonesome. I'm going to give you a short rendition of World War II from Italy's perspective.
Okay, I think I know one of them, but go ahead, talk, and we'll get into it.
So, Germany engages Poland, blah, blah, blah. Phony war, blah, blah, blah. Germany finds itself at war. Its most immediate threat's France. Italy is not involved. Italy is technically an ally of Germany, but Italy is not involved at the offset. When all of a sudden it looks like the Germans are about to take Paris, like a little sleazy piece of shit, Italy's like, you know what? We're joining the war, and they invade southern France. And they don't even do a good job of it, mind you. Just to see if they could get a little piece of the pie at the table when it's the peace conference.
Of course, we helped.
Yeah.
We helped.
So, Mussolini was a terrible leader. Mussolini was like legit very impulsive. And he was very erratic. Like, he would just change his mind and do things. So, the Italian military, they know. They can smell what's in the wind. And they're like, well, we have all these opportunities. The British are at war and the French are at war. Like, we could go attack all their little assets and stuff if we join the war, blah, blah, blah. So, Mussolini, it's a forethought. You're like, okay, yes, we're going to join the war. We're going to attack southern France. But what do we want? Mussolini, he wants to rebuild the goddamn Roman Empire. I am not kidding.
Mm-hmm.
That's his plan. He tried in 36 to invade Ethiopia. And that didn't it's embarrassing how bad that went for him. And we're talking about he was literally using modern weaponry against some guys on horses at some points, using shitty guns. And it was pretty embarrassing. They got through it, mind you. They did kind of take over a lot of Eastern Africa. But what he wanted was North Africa. He specifically wanted Egypt because the British were in control of the Suez Canal. That's the gateway, between the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean.
Right.
And also, in the Middle East was oil. Something Italy had zero of.
Yeah.
And the Germans also knew that, and they wanted it too.
Wars are never fought over oil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the United States learned it somewhere. But so the Italians, they're like, okay, we're going to join this war. So they join this war. They send the little freaking divisions and their cappuccino machines because they had the worst tanks in World War II. Even worse than the Japanese, I'd say. And they go, they invade southern France. And then they're like, you know what? We're going to invade Egypt. So Italy has a little colony in Libya.
Yeah.
This part of the world. And they actually have he's not a terrible Italian commander, Graziani. And this guy, he even knows like a relatively new type of blitzkrieg warfare. He had another term for it. And he had studied this and he knew how to use it. He had used it before. And he had the necessary amount of forces. Mind you, poorly equipped, poorly trained. Still, he could do it.
Yeah.
And he makes a plan. He doesn't go with the plan. So he fucks up. They invade Egypt by clustering all of their troops together on this one road that follows the part of North Africa, which you can easily see from the sea. And if you have an air force, you can just bomb the shit out of them. That's what happens. They come in. The British literally
just came in waving their arms, saying, "Hey, we're here," and got blown out of existence.
Stupid goddamn guys with canned spaghetti. I'm not making that up. They literally had canned spaghetti rations in the desert. These guys come.
I like canned spaghetti. What's your problem?
It's not good in war. You gotta heat it up. It's not appropriate.
Don't get me wrong. I've seen the photos of the U.S. and their canned cheeseburger MREs. Okay,
that's today.
I take some canned spaghetti. Okay, leave Chef Boyardee out of this.
So Luigi shows up, and before Luigi,
God, you're gonna get so much.
Luigi Mangiano. Okay, sorry, I won't go into that. It's a funny story, but our good friend Tony Soprano. He shows up on the border of Egypt, and before he can even invade, the British actually launch raids and just start fucking them up. So I think the Italians outnumber the British forces, who are taking, the British don't have many assets. They're fighting for their life in Britain at that point. It's like it's almost like a 3-to-1, or if not a 4-to-1 ratio. And the invasion doesn't just fail. The British completely overwhelm them, and they drive them all the way across North Africa, and now they're basically threatening where they came from, like Libya and such, and Tunisia. The situation is so goddamn bad that the Italians are they're going to have to beg the Germans to come and save them. Now, at the same time, while this is all going on, most of the Italian commanders were like, the crux of all of this, what we need to actually do so we can win in the Mediterranean in general, we have to take over this little island called Malta. Malta is like sitting directly in the center. It's like a little bit under Sicily. The British have a very fortified base there, and they can basically, anything that's moving in the Mediterranean, they use it as a base of operations to just hit. So the Italians, when they want to move supplies to their men in North Africa, they run a huge risk because of this goddamn island. There's submarines coming out of it, there's planes coming out of it, just fucking them up. They basically had a window of opportunity at the very beginning of World War II. They could have invaded and took it. It would have been a breeze. They don't for no reason. Their commanders just come up with all these rationales for why it's not possible, and then they do this North Africa thing.
Right.
Malta will be the reason why they lose in the end. It will survive. They will just continuously bomb it, doing very little damage, and then it's just a war of attrition with convoys, and the Allies are doing better than them in the Mediterranean. And Malta's the crux of it. I don't need to get into that, but just not invading Malta was one of the fucking dumbest things the Italians fucked up. On top of this, at the same goddamn time, things are going disastrously in North Africa. Mussolini's like, oh, we need to have, we have tanks in the mainland of Italy, and this is tank warfare in North Africa. We need, these tanks need to go over there to help the boys. So what we're going to do is we're going to invade Greece. So all of these divisions and units that were supposed to go to North Africa to help out the guy who's expecting them to show up, Graziani, and is depending on them to throw back the Allies, they go to attack Greece. And I don't know if you know this, Greece is pretty hilly. And tanks don't do well in hills.
This is exactly where I thought you were going with this.
Yeah.
So, to give you guys some context, I work with a lot of Greek people.
A few Greeks, yeah.
Just a couple. Okay? And if you live in North America, there's only a few industries. You can guess which one I work in, if you don't already know.
He's a massage parlor guy.
Yes. But, so, and obviously the older Greek guys, they love Greek history and they're so proud of this.
I mean,
and
they love what they think Greek history is. I mean, I used to work with Greeks in the restaurant business. They're like, yeah, 300 Spartans fought 1,000,000 Persians off at Thermopylae. You know? Okay.
Well, that's that. But I've heard this story so many times.
I know
how Mussolini had some quote of, "Oh, within 24 hours, I'm going to drink my coffee in the Acropolis, and
yeah,
I'm going to own Greece." But it is true that even if you have an equipment advantage or a munitions advantage or whatever, when it comes to guerrilla warfare and stuff like this, you're right. Tanks don't do well in mountains.
Nope.
Right?
Especially
even a lot of these Greek islands, there aren't a lot of places where you could just ride a boat up and hop onto the island and then go attack things.
Oh, we're not even talking about the islands. This is in the north of Greece.
100%, but I'm saying, because my boss is from one of the Greek islands, right?
Like Mykonos or something? Where is he from?
No. Chios.
Okay.
Anyways, right? So, he's obviously super proud of it because they beat the Italians back for so long. Now, I do think the Italians eventually sort of won, but...
No, they did not. We'll get to that. They don't win. Someone else does. Yeah.
But, well, yeah, they had to call in Germany to help.
Oh, yeah.
But still, point being, you know, it's... When you have a tactical advantage, when you have the advantage of the terrain, it can help you so much. And for them to just blindly ship tanks over there to try and take over islands, I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Oh,
it's not bright.
It was hilarious. So I don't want to go into this because it'll take forever. But what we know as Albania today was kind of colony. It wasn't necessarily a colony. It was a conquered territory of the Italians. They took that over pretty early on. So they use this base of operations, and they send all of these units over, basically into a really fucking hilly part of Greece. And the tanks are doing absolutely terrible against what they quote-unquote called a bunch of sheep farmers and goat farmers.
Pretty accurate.
100% accurate.
Yep.
Yeah, it turns out those guys in the mountains with the goats and the sheep, they knew where to position themselves and where to use artillery and just fire on these stupid Italians coming up these hills at them.
Yep.
And the Italians, not only did this fail, the Greeks pushed back. The Greeks started attacking them and started doing an offensive that looked like they could actually potentially come up and maybe hit the border of Italy at some point. So the Italians freak out. Mussolini screams to Hitler. And again, Hitler has to send units to freaking invade Greece, but also the Balkans area. The Italians...
Which is units he's taking away from other fronts, like France and
So this
Russia.
Is actually, at this point, it's not France has been conquered, but what's the crux of this is, so the Germans are going to send significant forces for North Africa. It's going to be bogged down for more than a year. One of the most famous commanders, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, this is where he's going to be. Greece, it took a few months. The Germans took him out. But this is exactly at the time Hitler invaded the Soviet Union and when he was going for Moscow. And at the tip of the point, he just didn't have enough to finish it off. And those little Italian decisions are a huge reason why he lost. Because he had a bunch of resources. The Italians don't have oil. Where did they get their oil? They had to beg the Germans. Where did the Germans get their oil? They had no oil. They had to beg they had the Romanians giving them oil. So the Italians are just siphoning from the Germans whenever they're doing any action. The Italians were a negative on the roster, you know? Like, it's fascinating how bad the Italians were. So Malta, with the Germans, will also take over because it's going to be German bombers who are going to be hitting Malta alongside Italians, but the Germans won't do any real damage. North Africa is going to be a year-long fucking thing. Then you got the Balkans and Greece. And then the Allies will they'll invade Sicily and they'll invade Italy. More and more Germans coming to fill the ranks because the Italians try to sign a separate peace and all that. And it's just more and more resources that the Germans don't have that's getting taken away from the East and slowly thinning that wall so the Russians can come and just walk over them.
Yeah. I will say this. I find it a little surprising. Call me crazy. I don't think Italy had the worst idea. I'm surprised that Germany didn't place more importance on controlling the Mediterranean before Italy.
The Suez Canal was cornerstone. So the Commonwealth, we had India, we had Anzac. A lot of men that would fight in the war. A lot of troop ships, a lot of supplies are coming from the Indian Ocean and the Pacific. If somehow the Italians took Egypt, they took control of Suez Canal, bye. You're going to have to go around the Cape of Good Hope, over Africa. You're fucked. And what? The Germans find out?
Every supply run is now 2 months longer.
Yeah. And the Germans find out, guess where the U-boats are going? We're going in South Africa. We're just going to start going after these guys. So that would have been insane. Another theater of war was the Middle East. So this is very close to some oil fields that were kind of a recent development. Mm-hmm. The Germans were scrambling in the Soviet Union to get the Caucasus Mountains. So there's oil fields in the Soviet Union. And if the Germans got their hands on it, could have been a bit of a game changer, because the crux of World War II, it really was a lot of it's oil. The Germans did not have oil to meet the demands that they had for their motorized warfare. Mind you, Germans weren't that motorized. They were really using horses most of the time. Now, all of this pales in comparison to the production issue. Italians, you think the Italians don't produce much today? I'm sorry. Giorgia Meloni, the leader of Italy right now, is a very beautiful woman. Love her, she's great. But Italy, World War II, did not produce jack shit. My wife drives a Fiat. That car out you see in the front, that's about as big as their tanks were. Their tanks were garbage. Here, just to give you an idea. When you build a tank, the turret, usually it moves left to right, up and down, right? Imagine a tank, it doesn't. You have to point the tank in the direction it's going to shoot at. Do you think that might be a minor flaw?
Depends how good you are at driving, I guess.
Yeah. So a few of those tanks the Italians were throwing at the British in the deserts in North Africa, they couldn't really pivot that way. It was just really bad tanks. We're talking
makes sense when you wonder why the tanks couldn't point uphill at the Greeks and shoot things.
Well, the Greeks actually, they gave them a good whopping. It was pretty funny. Mm. So I think I've covered most of Italy. I mean, there's other things like Mussolini was very delusional person. He gave up and was very depressed, wanted to capitulate pretty early. Hitler had to do this daring mission to rescue his ass, to just try and keep him in the war, and the Italians were just, by 43, they were useless. It was a detriment to Germany. But I guess, since we're going to come full circle, I guess we should talk about the big guy involved in this, who I think makes some of the biggest mistakes. Yeah. What do you know about, do you have any concept of, what did Germany fuck up in World War II?
Oh, I thought you were talking about your favorite American general, MacArthur. Sorry.
MacArthur. Yeah, MacArthur made a few bobos.
So, here's the thing. And again, some of this stems from my famous 10 Weird Things You Didn't Know videos or stuff like that. But I did do a little bit of independent research.
Okay, all right.
I don't think this is necessarily what cost them the war, but tell me about Germany's obsession with the occult and just...
Oh, yeah.
Not just the occult in particular, but random plans. And I mean, you talk about the Japanese trying to start forest fires, and I get in an abstract way how that could help them, but they're taking the fucking scenic route and a half to try and win a war. And Germany did a lot of that too. So talk to me a little bit about it, and then I want to bring up a few things that I found about weird shit that the Germans tried or wanted to try to end the war.
So I'm going to put this in a bigger box than just the occult. In useless allocation of resources, we're going to call it.
Well, I think that's the perfect box to put it in.
Particularly...
So let's talk about it.
Heinrich Himmler was legit. You've seen Indiana Jones, the films. You've seen Hellboy even.
Yep,
that kind of batshit stuff is Heinrich Himmler's shit there.
Yeah. By the way, we grew up in the 90s. Every single somewhat fantasy adventure movie, the Nazis were the bad guys. And you'll notice that.
Definitely.
How many movies were people just randomly fighting Nazis out of nowhere? Some of them didn't even take place in the 50s or the 40s or the 30s or during any of the world wars. Some of them take place in the 90s, and they're oh, we found a random Nazi group. Let's beat them up. Definitely. It's strange, the obsession over that in the 90s, but I digress.
I'd say even Marvel Red Skull comics, even Captain America comics there, even that has occult shit in there. That's really the pit of the Nazi bullshit. So I don't want to go into all the occult shit, but the mythology of myths of the Nordic nature, paganism, pseudo-religious shit, like the spear of longingness, the spear that stabbed Christ when he was on the cross. That Nazis actually were hunting that down under the belief whoever wielded it would just win all wars, because there's this fascinating history of how all these conquerors had the spear at some point, but whenever they let go of it, they lost the war, and then they were killed or whatever. And then there's people who claim that Hitler actually got his hands on it, but he put it in a museum instead of wielding it, and that's why the magic didn't work and all that shit. Heinrich Himmler believed in this weird shit. He had a whole division of SS who were looking for these artifacts. So if you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark and all that shit with Indiana Jones, that shit really happened. Like, they really were hunting for these weird artifacts, thinking that this was going to turn the tide. But other than the occult stuff, because it's part of a bigger problem, Hitler was really messed up and obsessed with allocating resources to projects that were stupid. Case in point, people are like fascinated with rockets from World War II. So the V2 rockets, even the V3 gun and all that. Yes, they're cool. Von Braun, he would take people to the moon eventually. Terrible Nazi, used Jewish labor to do it. Anyways, that's another rabbit hole. But Hitler put a lot of resources into this instead of like your fundamentals. Train men, build a lot of tanks, go to war, build trucks and all that. He spent a lot of his resources on these, like, we call them in German Wunderwaffe, like the wonder weapons, right? You had
giant space mirrors.
So you had mentioned the ray gun thing. So yeah, the sun gun. It's a famous thing that German scientists were trying to work on. Like, you put a giant mirror into space, and then you would use the light of it to like burn your enemies and stuff. That actually was like a theoretical plan, mind you, but they didn't get that far.
But literally a giant magnifying glass that they were going to put into space and basically was going to burn Washington or something.
There was one program the Germans had where they wanted to use mosquitoes in swarms to like give viruses and diseases to like the incoming forces. They put a lot of money on
that. Worked in Africa, but
everyone knows the famous mouse tank, which was like 2 times the size. It was like basically the size of my house, a tank. And it would have cost an astronomical amount of money, and it would have took forever to make, but Hitler was obsessed with really big things. Like, there was this big rail cart gun called, like, the Thor cannon.
Oh, they could shoot across the ocean or something.
No, that's a V3. Okay, so we'll talk about that. The V3, which isn't a rocket, it was a, we'll call it a super gun, was placed on, like, the closest area of France that could possibly hit Britain, and it was going to be this, like, thing where it was these pistons that kept pressure gauges that would shoot this fucking, like, it's like a big cannon that just keeps multiple explosions in a sequence that would like launch this thing to hit Britain. It didn't work, and it was huge, and you could literally fly by and see that they were making it. So the British watched them making it, waited until it was like 80% complete, and they bombed the fuck out of it. So yeah, and it was a member of the Kennedy family who was involved in operation against it. Took it out. But Hitler was really obsessed with these wonder weapons, and he allocated far too many resources and money to them instead of just focusing on the fundamentals that he should have been. But that's the least of his problems. You have something else you want to get into there?
Well, that's it, because I wrote some of these things down that I found, and some of them get into that. Granted, not all of these were by Germany. I do think a couple of them were American. But talking about, again, a big one was this solar death ray sun gun, whatever they called it, which was just a giant mirror launched into space.
What was it? There was a James Bond film where they had this. It's Pierce Morgan. He's in
Pierce Brosnan.
Pierce Morgan.
And I was,
Pierce Morgan.
and I was actually going to say, no joke, I had this exact thought when I was reading this shit this morning. Is that James Bond film based off of this?
I guess so.
Because I could be wrong, correct me in the comments or whatever if somebody knows about this. But wasn't the bad guy Koreans in there? Now, granted, not Japanese, but you got a giant sun gun. It was against North Koreans, and you're talking about Great Britain. Am I fucking high, or was this James Bond movie, he just found out about this and was like, well, let's twist 2 details and stick James Bond in there, and here we go. Okay, that's first of all.
Is it Tomorrow Never Dies? Die Another Day? I can't remember the...
I think it was Die Another Day.
Die Another Day.
That's the one where he's like held hostage and he's like tortured for however long on a boat. Anyways, I digress. But yeah, I have a list of some of these weird projects and concepts that they have that they probably sank money into. And, so there was Project Habakkuk, which is where they tried to build a giant aircraft carrier made out of...
Pyrite, yeah.
Well...
Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan, and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, Season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it, without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software, and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
Pykrete, which of course, when you're looking up on YouTube, they say they tried to build an aircraft carrier out of ice. It's not ice.
No,
but
it's wood pulp with ice, yeah.
Exactly, which Pykrete, it's actually named after the general who had the idea or something, I don't remember.
By the way,
something Pykrete.
They proved concept though. It actually would have worked. It's just, the thing is, by the time that they were, because they had built a model in, it was a lake in, I think, British Columbia. By the time they had built
that's
the model,
the other reason why I saw it, because they did it in Canada. I'm like, of course, they come to the
Canadian
Canadians
project,
for something built out of ice. What else is
they had alternate things that had come up by the time it would have actually come in.
The next thing they're going to ask us for a battle canoe.
Yeah.
But the other one that got me, and you said something about rat tank and this and that and killer mosquitoes, but the freaking weaponized animals, animal warfare.
I've done many on those,
which I'm sure PETA would have a field day with, but we're not going to get into that. So I read about bat bombs, which was either by the U.S. or by the Great British Army.
It was Americans. It was B.F. Skinner too. It was involved in that.
Which is literally bats with incendiary bombs because all Japanese houses are made out of paper. So let's release a bunch of bats into towns in Japan.
They proved concept. They attacked a little makeshift thing that they made, but when the American commanders found out how long it would take and what it cost, they were like, absolutely not. Stop the project.
That seems like the dumbest thing. Yeah. Okay. The other one I found was the rat bomb, which is where they put rats with explosives mixed in with Japanese coal. Or German coal, sorry.
Yeah, German.
Hoping that they'd just chuck it into the ovens and then all their coal furnaces would blow up.
Yeah, that actually has to do a lot with the realm of espionage. They had tried a lot of things with like dead rats and doing all these other things. They like, anyways, that's all. I can't get into it. It's a whole other story. But since we're on this tangent, because I've covered this subject a lot, the precursor to the CIA tried to create cat guided bombs. So I am not kidding. I have never found the name of the guy who was working for the OSS, but it's on the record. There was a guy working for the OSS, and they allowed him to do research. He came up with a theory: cats don't like water. So if you were to quote unquote attach a cat to a bomb dropped from an airplane, it sees a ship or the ocean. It's naturally going to guide itself to land on the ship. So they tested this out.
How does a cat guide itself midair?
Oh yeah, no. Apparently there was apparatuses. The problem is, these bombs are going like hundreds of miles per hour. Like, these things are going really fast. The cats passed the fuck out when they started to test this out. And then when I guess somebody at the OSS saw what was being spent, they're like, cancel this project, this fucking idiot. But this is on the record, and there was a History Channel episode that was based on this and what it would have looked like. It was retarded as hell. Yeah.
Like, and the other one I read about was these anti-tank dogs.
Everybody used that. Yeah, that was pretty prolific. The Soviets...
Yeah, but at first they were like, okay, so just train the dog to like drop the bomb under the tank and then run away. Yeah. And then they were like, yeah, but by the time the bomb goes off, the tank moves. So then they're like, fuck it, it's a kamikaze dog now. No. And then just blow the dog up with the bomb as soon as it's under the tank.
Let me educate you with why that went wrong, because it's actually a much funnier story. It's tragic because these poor dogs, right? So the Soviets, they trained their dogs to bring the bomb and go under the tank. And guess what? It worked. Dogs went under the tanks, and they put the bomb and all that, and they blow up. Yeah. So, we're Canadians. I don't know if you know this, but the way that we produce our gas for our vehicles, or diesel back in the day, is quite different from other cultures that don't have as harsh winters, okay? We have different diesel quantities.
Has to be temperature adjusted.
Dogs are trained with the Russian tanks. What do dogs, what senses do they use the most?
Smell and hearing.
Yeah, so the dog smelled the diesel of a Russian tank. So when they started to initiate in combat, the German tanks were using a completely different diesel. The Russian
Tell me the dogs were going under the wrong fucking
the Russian tanks and started blowing up. Yeah.
No way.
And the Russians canceled this program because of the enormous amount of friendly fire incidents. But some German tanks were taken out by these dogs. Oddly enough, if people are interested, the Japanese performed this too. Better results. And the Vietnamese during the Vietnam War learned from the Japanese and also used what we call anti-tank dogs. Yeah. It unfortunately, because it's a very gross thing that happened, it kept on going. To this day, seals and dolphins are used in war. And belugas. Okay. Beluga whales too. Yeah, they actually caught an old Soviet beluga, had equipment on it, like I think a few years ago. They found it in the Arctic somewhere, and it came up to a bunch of people like looking for food.
Well, I can understand them also. Like, okay, you're talking about an ocean. Radar technology, especially in World War II, only goes so far. Yeah. So I can understand them placing some trackers or stuff on animals to maybe locate enemy ships or whatever. Yeah, that makes sense.
All sorts of dolphins
making kamikaze bats and dogs, holy fuck!
It was only recently that the programs using dolphins was quote unquote ended, but there's a lot of dolphins used in military service. Also during World War II, I always have to bring this one up because my degree's in neuroscience. B.F. Skinner, who's the father of basic what do you call it? You know who Pavlov is by any chance? Okay, the Pavlov experiment. So B.F. Skinner is basically operant conditioning. I guess he's not the grandfather, but he's the guy that really started operant conditioning. And he used to be fascinated with pigeons. So he would train pigeons to play ping pong and stuff. There's videos of this. He came up to the United States military and he's like, I can make missiles that are guided by pigeons. And the United States Army is like, well, this is retarded. We'll give you like $50,000 or something. So B.F. Skinner, I think he spent maybe half a year. He put these pigeons in this device. It was like shaped like a missile. He put a screen with a still image. It's a moving video image of a ship. And the pigeon would peck on the ship to receive like the treat. So the more it pecked at the image of the ship in comparison to, like, let's say there's an ocean background or something. And he proved concept. It worked.
Okay,
But
so
again,
then when you put the real missile, the PEC is like the guidance system, and it leads the missile to the
of
shield.
course, just like the bat bomb situation, when the army was like, "Wow, this actually works. Like, how many can you train? How long does this take? How much will it cost?" It was ridiculous. Like, it took way too long. Although B.F. Skinner, he was very adamant about doing this. And yes, people, there was no escape for the pigeon. It was unfortunate, but he did have quote unquote pigeon guided missiles. Yeah.
Well, I want to put this out there for the world. I am 100% against animal cruelty, but if ever there is another war to come, I am more than on board with making kamikaze bombs on Canada gooses and just sending them all down south to blow whichever enemy up. I don't care, because that animal needs to be obliterated off the face of the planet.
They're evil.
There's a reason we call them cobra chickens, and they're not nice.
I
don't
guess
like them.
I gotta dabble more into the German issues so we can finish this episode out. There's just so much to bring up. In general, Hitler is one of the number one issues with World War II. It's ironic to say. Hitler was a dictator. He was a huge micromanager. He basically mid-level commanders would just be out in the field looking at their watch, waiting for a message to say that they could do something, or they're waiting for Hitler's orders what to do. They couldn't proceed. It was that much of an issue. And Hitler was the guy who made really bad decisions. Invading the USSR the way he did, because there is a rationale for why he did it. Terrible. Bad planning altogether. The logistics of it was a catastrophe. Hitler also declared war on the United States after Pearl Harbor immediately. He could have played around for a while, and it would have made things a bit more awkward for the United States, and it could have played out
the USA
better.
might have been a little more distracted by Japan and not bothered with the Nazis as much.
The United States, they had been planning and wanted to go to war with Germany. And even with the Pearl Harbor, they directly, they would have a strategy called Europe First. They wanted to go to war with Germany, but if Germany, didn't declare war the way they did, the United States would have had to waste a little bit more time figuring out a logistical, a reason, a rationale to do it. They would have happened, but it would be wasted time, and it wouldn't be a surgence of all this stuff against Germany right away. So Hitler bungled that up. That's one of the lesser ones. The famous ones, Hitler was very obsessed with Napoleon's defeat during his war with the Russians. So famously, Napoleon sent his Grande Armée to take Moscow, and what the Russians did is they just burnt Moscow to the ground. They left. So when the French Grand Armée showed up, they basically had nothing, no shelter, no nothing.
Ruin.
They froze to death. Hitler was obsessed with that being a thing. He's like, I do not want my men to come into the same situation. In order to prevent that, he ironically did some rather stupid actions. He made sure that they weren't issued winter clothing so that their summer offensive, they had a rationale for why they needed to finish it quickly. Because he was told, and all of his reports indicated, the Soviets, as he said himself, based off of how the Soviets performed against the Finns, it was like they had a rotten door, and it was just a matter of kicking it in. That's how it would have been easy. The Soviets proved not to be easy pushovers, and all of a sudden the summer offensive went too long, and they got into the muddy season, and it was looking like winter was on the cusp. And he has all of these divisions of men without winter clothing, and they ended up freezing. So ironically, he actually caused the thing that he feared. He also became obsessed with this battle over Stalingrad. At the time, It was called Stalingrad. Stalin himself, both of them kind of made this jousting over the city that had there's no reason to really take it. Hitler should have focused on either swinging and just taking out Moscow, which probably wouldn't have ended the war, mind you, but still. Or the most important thing would have been the Caucasus oil fields. That was what he really needed to do. In World War II, the Soviets, they took their entire industry and they literally just moved east. They put it over some mountains, and the Germans, no matter what, they could not have gone over. They really couldn't have done anything about this. But Hitler became obsessed, and he made it this kind of face-saving thing over Stalingrad, and too many operations, too much resources, just bungled up for years, and he just watched his army wither on this bullshit.
Well, I guess anytime you have a dictator, there is that little bit of vanity.
Yeah. I mean, some of his commanders were absolute morons, too. Hermann Göring, for one.
Yeah.
Very big idiot.
Well, But that's the thing. They want to prove that they're better than the other dictators. They're better than the other conquerors. They're better than, there's that vanity where they want their name in the history book. They want to have that note of I did this when nobody else could. How many people have talked about being, thought about it during history, being better than Alexander the Great or better than Genghis Khan, and we're still talking about these guys today. Well, any dictator, any conqueror who's trying to control a significant part of the globe, that's in the back of their mind, that's part of what they want. I'm not saying that's the only objective, and sometimes that leads them to make stupid decisions.
Oh, another big blunder I haven't talked about. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Dunkirk.
Years ago, and it's at the time it didn't interest me all that much. So I'll be damned if I can remember much of it. But
Hitler's commanders, when they invaded France, they took him basically. Like, it was incredible what they did to him with the blitzkrieg through the Ardennes forest. When they took Paris, the British had forces in mainland France, and they were basically just screwed. So they were fleeing to the coast, and I mean, it's an enormous feat to try and get all these men on these ships over. Yep. And Hitler's Wehrmacht, who are just guys on meth, rampaging, they could have overtook what was like a beachhead perimeter of the British Expeditionary Forces, and they probably could have captured like a good 100,000 guys or whatever. And Britain would have lost the majority of the men that would train the army that it would be using in the entire war. Like, it would have been a complete catastrophe. And Hitler stopped his men from basically doing the coup de grace there. Like, he just all of a sudden put an order, don't go anymore. Like, bomb them a little bit, but leave them.
Maybe scared of overextending, or?
No, people have always looked into this. It's been scrutinized by historians. It seems overall people can agree that perhaps Hitler thought Britain would have sued for peace, given this. Like, it was kind of putting a coin on the peace table. Like, look, I kind of threw you this, like, I could have done something to you here. And it was an enormous blunder. Again, that's some people's arguments. There's hundreds of other answers to this, but no one really knows. It really was very bizarre that he did this. And I mean, this is, anytime Hitler made a decision himself, it actually seems to be a blunder. There's much more than this. Before World War II, Hitler was obsessed with making a grand surface fleet to, mirror the Royal Navy, which would never be possible. The Royal Navy's, that's what they do. So the guy who's in charge of like the German Navy, Donitz and stuff, like, basically the only things that were of use to the Germans were their U-boats. Yeah. And Hitler put all this money, like, ships are very expensive, into like the Bismarck and all these other, the Skarnhorst, all these things, these famous ships. And all of this could have been just more U-boats. And the U-boats is what did a lot of damage in World War II. So, fuck, that really was a huge blunder. Hitler should have put no money into the surface fleet.
I think, again, you're getting into that vanity where I want to build a bigger ship, I want to build a stronger ship. Yeah. And, I mean, the Bismarck definitely made a mark. And I'm guessing in his mind, as if it was successful, well, we'll just build 20 of those.
Oh, yeah, they had extravagant plans.
What was the name of the sister ship again? The twin? There was another one.
There's a lot of ships. I mean, there's the Tirpitz.
Was it the Tirpitz, the sister ship of the Bismarck? I don't know if it's the sister of the Bismarck. The Tirpitz is the other famous ship. There was the famous aircraft carrier they were coming up with, the Graf Spee, which was used as a target practice by the Soviets at the end of the war when they took it, which is hilarious. But the Hitler in general, he was a terrible commander, very bad micromanager, and one of the worst qualities was famously he had an inner circle. He would only promote people that were loyal to him, not off merit. So he had a cult following, right? And the people that he had part of that is almost smart, but part of that could be your downfall at the same time. Yes,
Hitler actually, and he wrote about this. He loved having people in his inner circle fighting amongst each other, because it's actually a classic thing from warlords and dictators. You don't want people who can all of a sudden get together at a banquet and kill you. You want them always coming at each other, because if they're all fighting each other, they're never going to coalesce and kill you. And Hitler had a lot of people come after him, right? A lot of assassination attempts. And I mean, it was an unruly match. Himmler, Göring, Goebbels, Bormann, if you want, all these guys that were in his immediate circle, they all were fighting each other. And do you think that was good for administration? No. completely fucked up everything.
Probably.
And before we end this podcast, I'll say one of the number one things that really screwed up World War II, other than the oil, people are always... I find a lot of people surprised to hear this. During war, we have a thing called a full war economy. You gear your economy to produce the weapons of war necessary to win the war so you can get back to being a normal country.
U.S. shutting down factories for bullet production, tank production, women in factories.
Ford, the
supplying guns.
Chevrolet, Ford, and all of them were making airplanes.
Yeah.
Okay. Germany never did that. Germany they didn't have a full wartime economy until like 44 when Albert Speer was put in charge.
Which is too late.
And an architect, by the way, not a guy who should have been. When he was put in charge, one of the first few things he found out was all the companies were competing with each other to steal resources. And then he looked at how they were making things. And the German model is not the Ford assembly plant. So in the Ford assembly plant, you're making a car, everybody makes like a certain part, and by the end of it, the car is made. The way the Germans were doing World War II, one guy made the tank. So you had a very sophisticated...
He started step one and then just went all the way to the end.
An incredible engineering feat. Very gifted people that could do every single part, touch to finish, basically. Took for fucking ever. The Germans were so obsessed with quality, they wouldn't put it out if it didn't have the right paint. While the Americans sometimes didn't even paint their tanks. They just threw them out there. Or they were like, oh, what color should the tank be? What's the cheapest and fastest color? Green. Go. And we just put it out. The Germans would do these like camouflage tanks, all this shit. So Albert Speer, when he comes into this job, he's like, literally, I have one company who makes like the iron bars that goes to this company they need to make the tanks, and they just won't give them the iron bars. So he's trying to figure out the logistics of the companies aren't working together. And he's like, what the fuck is going on? We're in war. This is like 44. The German economy, they had not actually done a full wartime economy. Hitler did not want the population of Germany to actually feel like they're being, screwed over by this war. Because he didn't want to lose power. And certainly bit him in the ass because the Americans were building less bad, like let's say qualitative. Tanks weren't as good as the German Panzers, but when you're building 3 to 4 Shermans per whatever, like a Panzer Tier 3 or whatever, it didn't matter. You got 3-4 tanks for every fucking Panzer that's coming out. You're gonna beat them. Yeah, the Germans had the Tiger. Oh, that's a great tank. Who gives a shit when you have like 4 other Bradleys or Shermans coming at them? In the end, it was production that really screwed Germany over, and Hitler was too incompetent. He didn't have any good managers for this shit. It's almost like he wasn't serious about World War II in the end.
Well, again, another famous quote that I heard that I always loved, and I'm paraphrasing here, forgive me if I don't get it word for word, but it was, who was it that said, one Panzer is worth more than any 4 American tanks, but the Americans always had 5?
Yeah, that's a famous quote. Yeah, I don't know if it was, maybe it was Rommel. Maybe
That's such a good quote.
It might have been Heinz Guderian who said, I'm not sure, but I've heard that one.
That's such a good quote because that's exactly it. The Americans just outproduced them.
Yeah.
Which, again, we knew it was a war of attrition and kind of would have gone that way anyways. But now, talking about German screw-ups, and believe me, this is definitely not something that cost them the war or probably made any bit of difference, but I found it funny. This is one thing I discovered that you didn't even know about. And talking about Albert Göring.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah, I didn't realize he had a brother.
Okay, so you don't seem to have a very high opinion of his brother.
His brother was a morphine junkie, dumb piece of shit, Prussian.
But still, about having a position, being in charge of the Luftwaffe, one of the founding members, or he's the one that started the Gestapo, right?
Yes, because everybody wanted their own secret police, so Heinrich Himmler made the SS, Göring had the Gestapo, and then they would send their secret police to go spy on the other guy, trying to get them killed and stuff. Yeah.
Right, okay. So, for those of you who don't know, because I just read about this, so Göring had a brother named Albert, who apparently was incredibly anti-Nazi. He was against the whole regime, he didn't believe in it, he didn't do this.
Göring also was himself, too.
Well, apparently Albert Göring spent half of the war using his brother's authority to undermine the Nazis, meaning he would go to certain places under false pretenses, say he needed prisoners as laborers, and then just drive out of the city and free them. And just be like, yeah, you can go. And he spent the whole time, like, if he was going to get captured by the SS or by the Gestapo for doing this, he'd just say, well, guess who my brother is? Fuck you, you can't do anything. And there's another famous story of where they had a bunch of Jewish women cleaning a street or scrubbing a street on their hands and knees. So Albert Göring went and got on his hands and knees and started scrubbing with them. And obviously the German officer said, well, we can't have this guy's brother scrubbing streets. We're going to get fucking fired or decapitated.
Oh, yeah.
So they stopped all the Jewish women from scrubbing the streets. And I thought that was so funny because you think about that in any other context where somebody's brother would go out of his way to undermine. Maybe not your favorite in terms of what he did, but arguably one of the most powerful figures in all of Nazi Germany.
Oh,
one of the most influential people in all of Nazi Germany. And his brother's just going behind his back and fucking with everything that he does.
Oh, yeah.
That's, I thought that was actually hilarious.
Well, we'll finish this episode off because honestly, I've been drinking a lot of beers. I have to pee. But Göring was in the line to be second in command if Hitler died. So if Hitler died, it was between him and Heinrich Himmler. Basically, these two guys were the number ones. I think
Heinrich Himmler, Mr. This is too much for me. I'm going to go die at a spa. And,
the fucking Heinrich Himmler was like he's such a goddamn loser. He was born in a generation. He was too young for World War One, too old for World War Two, so he had a chip on his shoulder.
Right.
Like all these guys in Hitler's inner circle. Goebbels, the propaganda minister, he was a chicken farmer. He's a fucking loser. Became a lawyer. And
just realized this beer mug you gave me is dirty as fuck, but that's another story.
Well, thanks for telling the audience I'm a shitty dishwasher.
Yeah.
But Göring is an aristocrat. He's like call him almost like a noble. He's for a Prussian. Very prestigious. World War One. He was a fighter ace. Got a bullet in the leg during the putsch with Hitler and marching in the streets. Had a crippling he was a morphine addict ever since. He was a junkie. Got really fucking fat. The guy would like have these extravagant, weird outfits made for him. He'd go around with this like fucking giant little staff thing with an eagle on top. Like he was full of himself, right?
Yep.
His whole job was he was the guy that could talk to the business guys and the industrialists. Because despite what people think, Hitler was not in charge. It was really industrialists, the backbone of like the Krupp manufacturers, like all the guys who made the weapons of war. They were the ones really controlling the shots. And they loved Göring. Göring was not much of he wasn't really a real Nazi. He was this old style guy.
Businessman.
He liked to go to parties. He liked to drink champagne. And he was the guy that he would go around, flirting with these business guys, getting them in bed, and making them do the things, right? And these guys would be like, get Hitler to do this. That was his job. So Göring is this junkie. He's always fucked up. He's not doing his job. His job is to be controlling the Air Force, the Luftwaffe. Does one of the worst things you can imagine. He overpromises to Hitler. And he doesn't have any concept of what he's doing. He's a World War I pilot. He doesn't know anything about strategic heavy bombing. So the Battle of Britain is basically what's going to win the entire war. And he, off on a whim, just keeps changing targets. He keeps making these blunders. He doesn't put money into, like, radar technology, so the British are defeating them just by knowing where they're coming because they have better radar. He's fucking up everything with Britain. On top of that, after he fucks up with Britain, it's called the Battle of Britain, Hitler has a problem at Stalingrad. It's very far away. The men are getting surrounded. Göring has an answer to this. Fuck it. I'm going to get all the supplies. With my Luftwaffe, we're going to drop it on the positions of the Germans. Even if they're surrounded, they'll be able to fight their way out. It was completely unfeasible. No one in the Luftwaffe thought that it was possible because of the sheer amount of weight in the aircraft, the amount of fuel it would take to move it. It didn't make sense.
Not to mention, if it doesn't work, you're just feeding free supplies to the enemies.
Exactly. And Göring kept this throughout the entire war. He kept these promises, and he was completely out of his depth. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, Hitler loved keeping his inner circle the way it was, and Göring was a comical moron. And he was kept in place, and he was in one of the highest powers of position, and he spent all of his time just buying luxury goods and living he was living it up, which, mind you, I guess compared to the other guys, he had it a little bit easier and better. When he was put on trial at the end, he was very surprised that they were going to kill him, which is, I always found that kind of comical. And you had mentioned before the podcast the thing with Heinrich Himmler Because by the end time of the war, he's getting massages. He's in Sweden, and he's basically negotiating with the Allies, and he thinks he's going to come out of this on top. Because he's like, oh yeah, Hitler's going to die. I'm going to be second in command. And you know what his bargaining chips are? Fucking concentration camp survivors and shit. So he's like, oh, I'll save all the Jews. I'll give them to you. Well, I'm going to save their lives. And you know what the Allies said? We're going to fucking kill you. Like, no, we're going to put you on trial. You're going to die, you stupid bitch. And yeah, that's, he got his just deserves. He was a nasty little shit. Between Hitler and Himmler might have been worse than Hitler. If Himmler was in charge, God knows. Probably much worse. He was a real psycho. I mean, they're both psychos, but Himmler was holy goddamn shit. And, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, the Axis were not good at war, to say the least. So, yeah, this has been a huge rant. Before we leave, I just want to mention, for those who want to further support the channel, please check out my YouTube membership at, the Pacific War Channel on YouTube, or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/Pacific War Channel. By joining either, you get access to the exclusive podcast, you get early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. Thank you, Justin, for placating this hostage position and talking about this random shit.
Please feed me now.
And we are going to go have
You promised me food.
We're going to go have our dinner that I promised you and continue drinking.
Yay. Macaroni and cheese with little hot dogs.
Little ketchup on top. Until next time.
Thanks, guys. Bye.